Welcome to the Dashboard Effect Podcast. I'm Brick Thompson.
I'm Caleb Oakes.
Hey, Caleb, how's it going?
Pretty good, Brick.
Good. All right. So we're going to talk about something interesting today. This is the argument that sometimes comes up about whether a data warehouse should be built in a waterfall fashion. Basically, let's figure out everything we might ever want to do, spend months, 18, 24 months, and lots of money building that out all at once, versus more of an agile approach where you're going by various subject areas and building it by priority of what's going to impact the business most. I think you coined a great term for this, report-driven data warehouse development, which I really like. So yeah, that's our topic.
All right, cool. Yeah, the older way, or the waterfall approach, that's where, people like Ralph Kimball, that was really what they set out to do. Like that, understand everything in the business, and then you can go about building your data warehouse. And, to give him credit, there's a lot of good stuff that came out of Kimball, and we still use a lot of his techniques and thinking. But that's one of the things that we definitely do not follow. And because it just takes too long, and business changes, and it's fast, and you got to be faster. You just got to be faster.
Yeah. Well, you make a really important point. I think one of the most important reasons not to take that approach is just what you said. Businesses change, and over 18 to 24 months, things that you thought were important to start with may not be the most important now, or requirements that you thought were important actually need to be different, or data sources changed. Now, you could probably make an argument to each of those. Well, if you build it right, your common data model, and you've thought it through, and it's generic enough in the right places, that doesn't matter. But we haven't seen that to be the case. And in fact, I think the sort of the waterfall approach to data warehousing frequently ends up in a failure. Right. At least that's what we've run into. And then we get brought in to do an agile approach so they can get reporting now that they need. Right.
Yeah. I think it almost always does. And it's a lot of times it's just people just get impatient. Maybe the project would have been successful, but it's like we can't wait that long to understand what's happening in our business. So we don't do that.
Yeah. It comes back to things you and I have been preaching for the last 90 days on this podcast about you need to really identify what are the business goals that you want to be able to impact with your reporting, your data warehouse, and really understand that. What decisions do we need to make? What actions do we want to be driven by our data warehouse? And then you can look at those various things and put a judgment on what's the highest priority, what's going to get the biggest bang for the buck, where's the ROI, and embark there. And that doesn't mean you have to do one thing at a time. You can do many things at a time. But if you have the right resources, both on your service provider, your IT department side, and on the stakeholder side, because everybody has to come together to make that happen. So you can do that. But what you don't want to do is say, let's take a generic approach. Let's come up with this common data model that will be good forever. It's an old style and an old approach, and some people cling to it, but it just does not seem to be to deliver the high efficiency, high impact data warehouses that we see now.
Right. And, that term that you mentioned at the beginning, report-driven data warehouse development, if you take that just at face value, you might think, well, that's going to pigeonhole us. But really, coming up with the model first and then trying to build reports on it, that pigeonholes you more than anything, because you're stuck with what you've just built and spent so much time building kind of in theory, and then in practice it actually doesn't work out. So really it's practical data warehouse development. You could almost go at it that way. Like we have to support something that's going to impact the business. Data warehouse also, it's an interesting spectrum, right? You can think of, some people might think, oh, okay, well, let's just take my table and put it into a database, and that's a data warehouse, and it's report-driven data warehouse development. But that's not really the case, right? You're accumulating tons of technical debt. It's not going to scale. You're not going to be able to add other data sources, intermingle different data. That's not going to work. And then on the other huge end of the spectrum is that waterfall approach of we have to have all of our data in the data warehouse, and that's not a good approach either. So it's somewhere in between, and that's what we recommend going after.
Yeah, that's right. I think when you end up doing the more waterfall approach, you end up asking your report writers to sort of contort and have to figure out how to make this architecture that was maybe built on a more generic from a more generic viewpoint, make that work for whatever reporting they're doing. When in fact, if you were architecting at the same time, if it was report driven, if you knew the subject areas you were going after and what the key drivers for the business are, you can make it much easier for them.
Yeah. I mean, a good story of that is we had a client where we were building, in our typical fashion, this report driven development. And so the third party came in and said, no, you got to have this canonical data model. I remember that was just his term, and it just, I hate that term now, but that was the
PTSD.
Right. Yeah, we've got to have this generic data model that everything can plug into. Luckily, we were able to talk the client out of doing that, because had we done that, you look at where they're at now, they had so many specific reporting needs and reports that were really impactful for the business that, quite frankly, would not have been possible by taking that other approach. Like that's the only way you just wouldn't be able to do it.
Right. That was a huge win, going the right way there.
Yeah.
So I do think there are some cases where a business needs to get lots of data available to analysts right away, and there's a solution for that, and we do that with some clients, and that's to use a data lake and to bring data in from multiple systems, maybe even already consolidated and summarized in some ways to make it easier to deal with, but maybe not. Maybe you're just pulling tables in there and raw CSVs and so on. And then the analysts can use that to do some ad hoc reporting. And as we realize, or as the stakeholders realize exactly what they need to answer those questions and drive those behaviors, then you can easily go from data lake to data warehouse. So you can get a little bit of a hybrid, best of both worlds situation there.
Yeah, and you hit on a couple of key points if that's the route you're going to take. One is you don't really know what you want yet, but you maybe, and you didn't mention this, but it's worth saying, if your data is in disparate systems, like if you've got one system, there's really no point in putting it into a data lake. Right. Just build a data warehouse on it, right? But if you've got like 10 and they have the same type of data in it, maybe they're just different business units, get that stuff into a data lake, start figuring out the logic, because it's going to be different across all these systems, and then start building your report-driven data warehouse after that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I should have made that distinction at the beginning. If it's one data source, okay, you're building a data warehouse. Even then, you may not do every fact area within that data source, although you probably will because you're in there, so you're going to do it. So, good clarification.
Yeah. You probably don't start with every fact area, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because you shouldn't go and try and build a sales report, an inventory reporting, your whatever else you're going to need to report on, financials, all that stuff. You shouldn't go do all that at once. You should start at sales or wherever is the most important to start at for your particular business, and then continue building out the rest. That's kind of what we're saying. That's
right. Yeah. Get a high impact area, get good ROI, get adoption. Get it to start working, and then you can start pulling other things in. And this is not to say it all has to be serial. Okay, you're only allowed to do this area, and then you're allowed to do this area. You can parallelize these, but don't just sort of generally say, okay, give me everything.
Right. Yeah.
Have a strategy.
Sometimes that's what we see, where people have a misconception of you can just point a team like ours at a data source and say, build a data warehouse. That's not how we do it.
Yeah.
And that's not how you should do it. Yeah. You should say, why?
Yeah.
And then you can build your data warehouse.
Yeah, exactly.
From that source, right?
Good point. Yep. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to cover today. Anything else you want to say here?
I do think that it's worth saying, like, when we talk about a data warehouse with our clients, sometimes it can be misconstrued as that is a data warehouse. And when we say we're going to build a data warehouse, they think of it as this big, large, all my data is here and it's all reportable and it's all fantastic. And then we say, we're going to do it in 6 weeks. And then they're like, oh my God, there's no way you can't do that. But really what we're meaning is we're building version 1 of your data warehouse. It's going to have one reporting area driven off of it. And then in next phases, we're going to start pulling stuff in. So really, I think for people that are listening, that's the way you want to develop those things. For all the reasons we mentioned. You don't want to keep the business waiting. You don't want to find out you missed. 6 months down, or 6 or 12 or 24 months down the road. You just want to get started. And you're going to have a data warehouse after the first phase, right?
Right.
But it's just not going to be all encompassing. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. So you have a data warehouse after 6 or 8 weeks, maybe less depending on how small the area is. But that's not it. It's sort of like you've got your first starter home, and then you're doing additions as it makes sense and as you need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
All right, that's good. I'm glad you covered that.
Cool.
All right, I think that's it. Thanks, Caleb.
Thank you.